Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the Chicago Bears 2019 to 2023 NFL Draft Review. So, in today's episode, we're going to be looking at every single draft class from 2019 to 2023 to see one, how they've performed thus far, two, how they graded from a data perspective. So, if I was grading their draft class, how they would have graded using the data metrics that I use, and then of course seeing how they do in terms of value and other sort of things like that. To get a better understanding about the methods I use in terms of grading the class, I look at real approximate value, which is how they actually performed in the NFL, and this takes into account things like their starts, their statistical performances, yardage, sacks, tackles, different stuff like that. And you can learn more about that on ProFootballReference.com, which is called the approximate value metric. And if you go to any player profile on Pro Football Reference, you'll see their AV score there. So it kind of is a general score and it's percentile graded to give you the highest AV to the lowest AV. Also, we look at draft approximate value. This is the approximate value of the pick that they're selecting at. So if you picked a player at pick 10, what is the average AV or approximate value of every single draft pick that was picked at that spot? And that is going to be used to grade them from a value perspective. If the Bears took a player who performed better than how most players perform at that spot, they get a higher grade. If they performed less than what most players actually perform at that particular area, then they get a lower grade. So again, it's based on how past performances have resulted at those different spots, and that's kind of how that grade works. And then of course we look at the average draft value per draft range. This shows you the average approximate value score, which is percentile graded for picks 1 through 5, all the way down to picks 256 to 260. And there's also more. I could have made it a little bit bigger, but you kind of get the idea. The lower you pick in the draft, the lower the chance you're going to find a player that has great approximate value compared to other players. And then, of course, we look at expected approximate value. This is like the data grade for the prospects. So EAV essentially looks at how they performed in college based on their production, athleticism, all those other statistical factors, and boils it down to one number to kind of see what their data grade was in terms of their overall data at that from that perspective. So that's what that grade is, and I think it's good to see. Okay, are the Bears drafting based on data, or are they drafting based on other things? I think that's the biggest thing that the EAV can kind of be used for here. Then, of course, limiting factors. So, limiting factors is what can affect the data. What are some things that you can't really anticipate when you're talking about statistics? One thing is the coaching of a team. So, if a player graded well as a prospect, but they go to a team that has terrible coaching, they're probably not going to perform as well. Another thing is unforeseen injuries can lead to inconsistent outcomes. So, if a player goes to a team that and they do well and then they break their leg or they have some other catastrophic injury, that'll affect their AV. It really will. The publicity of media market can also influence perception of a prospect, leading to inflated grades. So, what do I mean by that? There are different organizations, media types that can pump players up. I think the best example of this would probably be Sauce Gardner for the Jets. Sauce Gardner did really well statistically speaking in his rookie season. When he came back the next year, he was not as great in coverage. He was not as great as a tackler. He kind of had a down year. He had a sophomore slump based on his overall statistical performance, but people still made him an all-pro because of name recognition in many ways. So you kind of have to take those things into account a little bit. Is the media is going to like who they like, and that can influence how people view players. It creates a bias, if you will, that can influence the data in terms of real AV. And then, of course, you have psychological, mental makeup can affect NFL outcomes. This just deals with, the mental aspect of things. Are they mature? Do they have alcohol, substance, issues? All those different kinds of things can have, those effects. And of course, substitution bias. This allows for possibility that coaches switch from higher costing prospects to lower costing prospects, but lower quality. So this deals with the fact that, okay, NFL team might have a prospect that is really good, but they want to move on from that prospect because they can't afford them. And this happens in the NFL a lot. You'll have prospects that are very good and they go to other teams to get paid and they end up being replaced with prospects that are just not as good as the replacement. So they're kind of forced to start a player who they normally would not have started, but because of cost reasons, they have to start them. So that's another thing that can affect AV grades here. Excuse me. So taking a look at the 2023 NFL draft class, or at least how the classes have performed from 2023 to 2019. Their value grades have been pretty decent from 2012 to 2019. Their real approximate value scores have not really done that well, though. Their best year would be 2020 and 2021. And then their draft approximate value, or typically the areas that they've been picking the most on average, which just deals with their draft slot, hasn't really been that great. Overall data grades, they had two years where they had 90 plus percentile data grades in terms of their draft. They had a 2022 class that was above average, and then they had below average in 2023 and 2019. So they finished as interesting in terms of overall data. But let's get into their draft class. So starting with 2023, the 2023 Bears class. The top pick, Darnell Wright, was a decent selection. His real AV was 96.74. The average AV for where he was selected was 95.83 out of 100. The only thing is in terms of the draft grade, you don't get extra points just because you draft a good player early. Because top 10 picks are supposed to be good players. So you get get points for uh, taking a good player, but you're not going to get more points considering if you were to take a starter in like the fourth round. So that's kind of how the grading goes with it. Um, After you leave him, Javon Dexter has not really done that well based on his real AV. We'll kind of see how he does this year. Tyreek Stevenson has been a decent cornerback for them, 89 percentile in terms of his real AV. Zach Pickens has been below average in terms of his performance. Roshan Johnson has been above average compared to what past players have done in the past. Noah Sewell hasn't really done that well. He had a great data grade, but hasn't really done much for them yet. But overall, I would say their overall data grade would be incomplete for them, and that's because we need more information. We need more seasons to kind of really get a good idea of how this draft class is actually going to perform. And typically, if a player hasn't broken out by year two, especially year three, then you're going to have problems there. But overall, I would say this is a pretty decent class. Again, Darnell Wright and Stevenson have already broken out to a certain extent, so I'm very excited to kind of see what happens in the future for them. Then, of course, we get to 2022. This class was a little inconsistent. The best prospect for them, based on their actual approximate value, was Braxton Jones in terms of offensive line. Kyler Gordon has kind of underperformed what his expectation was based on where he was drafted. Jaquan Brisker, same difference. He's pretty much about 4 points away from being what's expected out of a prospect like that. Jones Jr. has been below average what's expected. I know a lot of people really hated on that selection in that particular draft class, and so far he hasn't been able to shut the haters up, if you will. But I would give this overall draft a D plus. They did get some good players here, but they're kind of underperforming what they should do, if you will. And we'll get some more years to kind of see what happens with them. When we get to 2021, this is definitely going to be controversial, but Justin Fields has done well for them in terms of actual approximate value. Has he performed well as a quarterback compared to other quarterbacks? No. Has he performed well in terms of rushing yardage, touchdowns, those different kinds of things, and being a massive part of the Bears offense? Absolutely. So, you just have to look at it like that. If Justin Fields was not the starter for the Bears, they probably would have lost more games over the time period that he played in for them. So, as much as people either love him or hate him, he did bring actual value to the football team, and is a big reason why they did well in terms of their data grade in 2021. It was one of their best draft classes, but it'll be debatable for sure because I know some people love Justin Fields, somebody hate him, but you do have to value his ability as a rusher in terms of getting touchdowns, yardage on the ground, are definitely things that give value to the offense, if you will. And then, of course, Tavon Jenkins um, has kind of underperformed. Larry Borum has overperformed his draft status. Khalil Herbert as well. But overall, they could have done better in many ways, but it's not a bad draft class. I would give this class an A. When you look at the overall data that they did and the expected value of the picks they got, I think they did pretty well. They got players that, performed better than what typically is expected of where they were drafted. Then, of course, we get to 2020. So this is where you get Cole from at the tight end position. He's done well in terms of his real approximate value. Jalen Johnson at cornerback also has done well in terms of his approximate value. And, of course, Darnell Mooney. It's probably the biggest thing that really bumps him up is because most prospects at pick 173 average about 31.66 out of 100 in terms of their actual approximate value. And Mooney has been able to contribute 90.22 in terms of his actual approximate value. I understand that there's going to be some people who are like, well, Darnell Mooney is not that great of a wide receiver. And again, he's not like a 99 percentile wide receiver based on his data, but he has performed. He has been able to put some yardage, on the football field, some value, if you will. So from that kind of perspective, it's a good class from there. And I would give the class an A based on, how they performed versus how previous draft classes performed based on their statistics. Then, of course, we get to 2019. This was an F, but a lot of it is because they didn't really have a lot of draft picks. David Montgomery probably was their biggest hit. He had a 95 percentile real AV score. And then once you leave him, you get, like Riley Ridley, Duke Shelley. All those guys have really not done much long term for them. So I would have to give the 2019 class an F, but they didn't really have much capital to work with to begin with. But they did get David Montgomery, but overall, they could have done better in terms of the picks they selected. Overall, though, the Chicago Bears, excuse me, draft future. The Bears graded as the fourth best drafting team over the last 5 seasons, but most of the grades are propped up by prospects like Fields, who may not be on the team in the future, and he isn't on the team in the future. He's on the Pittsburgh Steelers now. The Bears have shown the ability to put up A plus draft classes compared to every class since 1993, but the biggest factor in where they go in the future begins in 2024. The Bears have 2 picks in the top 10 this year, and those could be the catalyst to a new era in Chicago. Despite the drafts not putting forward fruitful seasons, I do think there's some positives here in many ways. But overall, that's the Chicago Bears draft class. Check out these videos right here to see more content like this. Also, check out my formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics, and also check out the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide, which is available for purchase today. Link is in the description. Go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn as well, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.